Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode number 133 of DBR Bites. These are the air quotes small episodes that we have where we preview certain opponents. Of course, this week, a big week. Duke goes out to the West Coast, and we will preview the first game out west against the Cal Golden Bears. I'm Donald Wine, I'm your host for this episode. Jason, still in Africa, still having a great time, still sending us pictures. I'm still jealous. With me, as always, Scott Rich, who's been filling in for Scott. Appreciate you once again jumping back on.
Have I ever been a part of a Bites that has actually been bite-sized? I'm not sure that's ever functionally happened.
I think our last one was actually pretty decent. It
That's
was
true.
like
The vibes
20
check
minutes.
was actually bite-sized.
Yeah, yeah. We've had some small nuggets here. This one will be a little bit small of a nugget. We're obviously going to preview the Cal Golden Bears, and we have some audio from the weekly ACC coaches press conferences that happen between all the different coaches that are coaching throughout the week. With the exception of anybody who's playing on Monday, we have sound from Mark Madsen, Cal's coach, and we also have sound from John Shire. We will play that in a little bit. We ended the last show, Scott, with a great stat. Maybe great if you're Cal and Stanford, not so great if you're the rest of the ACC. So far, in the 18 months or so that Cal and Stanford have been a part of the Atlantic Coast Conference, no ACC team has gone west to play both of them and come back 2-0, with the exception of Wake Forest last year. So far this year, and with the exception of Wake Forest last year, every team that has gone out west to play two games has come back with a loss. And I say that because as we look at these opponents, first obviously with Cal and then Stanford on Saturday, you would think that these are two winnable games, and they very much are. And we're going to talk about why the records and the metrics might seem to be a little bit off. But make no mistake, this is a very difficult road trip that we're undertaking. The team is already out there, so they can get acclimated to the time zone change. They're already doing things with their body and their sleep schedules to make sure that they're calibrated for this West Coast trip. But it is going to be a difficult week, Scott.
And unless we forget, this is not last year's ACC. On top of
Mhm.
all that, there has been, now that we're a little bit into conference play, people are starting to reevaluate the relative strengths of the conferences. One way that they've been doing that, Jeff Goodman put out a tweet looking at the percentage of the conference's teams in the top 75 of the net. The ACC, 78% of ACC teams are in the top 75 of the net. The only conference above that is the Big 12, which I think everyone agrees is, a tier above everyone else in terms of strength. The SEC dominance storyline of last year isn't what it was. The ACC being as bad as it was in its history, that is no longer the case. So when you say, "Hey, Duke is going on the road to play two quality ACC teams," that is a tough week when you even before we talk about going out across the country, which is something that no Duke team has had to do, before the last couple of years in conference realignment.
Yeah, and again, I've repeated this on the show. This is what we asked for, right? This is why we lined up the schedule we did in non-conference. That's why John Shire has been talking about quad one games. We're going to be talking about a quad one game in this episode because that's what Cal is going on the road. Maybe just barely, but it still counts as a quad one game. Before we get into who they've played and some of the other stuff, I did want to make a note for those of you who have seen the scouting or I should say the injury availability reports that come out before every game. You've seen Ife Ufechukwu listed on there as out the last few games. Well, he will be out the rest of the season. John Shire announced yesterday on that ACC weekly press conference that he suffered a non-contact injury a couple of weeks ago in practice, and they're basically making a decision that it's, I guess, serious enough that they didn't mention any surgery, they didn't mention any details, but it seems like he's going to be out the rest of the year. Unfortunate for him, and maybe they're setting himself up for a medical red shirt to come back next year. That has obviously that's early, so don't want to speculate on that. But what is true is he will not be with the team for the rest of the season. Very, very unfortunate that a non-contact injury ends this season prematurely.
Yeah. If I recall correctly, if he already had 2 years of eligibility remaining, including this year. So, hopefully we can get the ball rolling and get him that medical red shirt. And this is a guy who can be that big body that break in case of emergency big, for another 2 years at Duke. It's a shame for him. You know how vital and important it is to have that big, to have that body in practice. We've benefited from that, from having that type of guy on our roster for years. It's a shame we're going to lose that the rest of the season.
Yeah, and again, he may not get it as much playing time, but as you mentioned, Scott, he is a big part of all the success that we have here. Not just before he got injured, but also after. He's still going to be a part of the team, just not playing or suiting up for the games. Let's talk about the Cal Golden Bears. Now, first of all, I just want to let everybody know on the East Coast, where both Scott and I are located, 11 p.m. Eastern Time on ACC Network. Let me repeat that. 11 o'clock p.m. in the nighttime on ACC Network. ACC After Dark involves the Duke Blue Devils. So get your coffee in tomorrow, Wednesday, for this game because you are going to need it if you're going to stay up. Now, some of us, Scott, don't have newborns that will dictate our schedule. I will be up for this game. So again, I don't expect anyone to email immediately after the game, but dbrpodcast@gmail.com to send headlines. We will record at some point on Thursday, the recap to this game. Let's talk about who they have played. They are 13-4 so far this season, 1-3 in the ACC. We're in the part of the season where we're going to talk just about the top 100 wins, those being UCLA and Notre Dame, which is their lone ACC win. They have some, again, very, their losses are against really tough teams. Kansas State by 3 in November, against Louisville by 20 to open up their ACC slate. They kind of had rattled off 9 straight between K-State and Louisville. And then this past week, they went to Virginia to play Virginia and Virginia Tech in a series of games. This wasn't a great week for the Cal Golden Bears. They lost to UVA by 24. They had a very tough game against Virginia Tech and ended up losing by 3. Now, I mentioned some of the metrics as we get into them. But Scott, they're 82 in KenPom. They're 90 in both Torvik and Evan Mia, but they're 71 in the net. So the net really likes Cal so far this season. And as I mentioned, because we're going on the road, it is a quad 1 game. Barely, but it's still a quad 1 game as it will show up in that metric, which of course is so ever important.
Yeah. I've talked on this show in my writing before about how the net they've given us all the ingredients to how the net is calculated, but not told us the recipe. So we know what
Mm-hmm.
goes in, but we don't know what the weighing is. And one of the things that supposedly in the secret sauce of the net is it's a little bit more results oriented than the analytical rankings, like the Ken Palms and the Torviks and things of that nature. So it sort of makes sense that a team that's 13-4 and has won games is going to be higher in the net than they would in some of these analytic ratings. Just like Duke is higher in the net than they currently are in Ken Palm and Torvik, because it may not always be pretty as we've, bemoaned, over and over again, but Duke is getting the win. One of the things when you talk about this Cal team, if you remember watching them last year, throw that out the window. This is essentially an entirely new Cal team. The only returnee who played non-trivial minutes for them last year is their starting center, Lee Dort. They're 247th in the country in Ken Palm's continuity metric. So this is a team that is comprised of transfers. This is an almost entirely new roster that Mark Madsen has had to put together, which makes their success all the more impressive. The fact that Mark Madsen is doing what he's doing out in Cal, given the challenges he's had to face, is pretty impressive. They're they're a little bit unique in that they're a slow team both offensively, but particularly defensively. They force opponents into taking long possessions, nearly 18 seconds of possession, which is, again, that's one of the slowest rates in the country. And how this manifests is the opposition takes a lot of one-on-one possessions. Opponents are not getting many assists against the Cal Golden Bears. They're assisting on just 56% of their made field goals. Again, that's one of the lowest rates in the country. But and at the same time, they're sort of forcing these one-on-one two-point baskets. Cal's good at forcing the opposition to take two-point baskets, go one-on-one, as is manifesting in this low assist rate. So that's what they're doing on the defensive end of the floor. On the offensive end of the floor, they're very fundamentally sound. They're a team that turns it over very, very rarely, only a 14.4% turnover percentage. That's one of the top 35 rates in the country. And they shoot it well across the board. They shoot 36% from three. They shoot nearly 80% from the line. So you think, okay, these are all fantastic, fantastic metrics. Why is this a average, power conference team? They don't get a lot of offensive rebounds, so they aren't getting very many extra possessions. They're one of the worst offensive rebounding teams in the country, 294th in the country in offensive rebounding rate. And also, despite the fact that they shoot well from three, they don't take a lot of threes. They're middle of the pack in the country in terms of how many threes they're taking per game. So they seem to be another one of these teams that you can force into taking so-so 2-point jumpers. They're again this 2-point distance metric that Ken Palm has rolled out. There's been one of the en vogue analytic tool of the year. They're another team that is very poor in that metric. They are prone, like SMU, to taking a lot of mid-range jumpers, not following the analytics that free throws and threes, or sorry, layups and threes are all you do. So this is a team that by all accounts is fundamentally sound. They're very, very experienced, even if that experience wasn't at Cal. We'll talk about that when we talk about the players. They do everything well, but they don't seem to, squeeze that extra juice out of the orange in terms of maximizing their efficiency, which is why they're, again, barely top 75 net team, a team that's more in the muck of the ACC.
So it's interesting because, on Ken Palm, they have two different types of metrics this time of year, now that we're in the conference. The metrics that you kind of discussed were a lot of the overall rankings. And then they also have the conference rankings. And some of those, the reason why they've had, a couple of bad games is because they've been very skewed. You mentioned that they're pretty decent at shooting threes. They've been terrible at shooting threes lately. You mentioned the offensive rebounding rate, that how bad it was. It's even worse in conference play. So there's certain things about that. And it's funny, it leads me to the sound that I mentioned at the top by Mark Madsen. Again, all the coaches, with the exception of the coaches who are playing on Mondays, participate in this 10-minute session each where everyone gets rapid fire questions from national media. And I was able to ask Mark Madsen a question about what he saw last week in the two losses against Virginia Tech, and what he wanted to improve as he goes into a week that features not just Duke on Wednesday, but also UNC on Saturday. Both Cal and Stanford basically are having the big week where both the two biggest draws in the ACC are coming to town. I wanted to know what he thought about what they needed to do to improve on that. Here's what he had to say.
Thanks, Donald. Thanks for the question. I would say ball security. We have been a pretty good team in terms of taking care of the ball and not having bad turnovers. In our most recent game, we did a poor job of taking care of the ball. We also fouled way too much, and so we have to play without fouling, and we have to take care of the basketball, and that's tough against both these teams because Duke is going to put a lot of. Let's talk specifically about Duke. Duke is going to put a lot of pressure on the rim. And it starts with Boozer, but a lot of those guys attack the rim. You have to defend out to the 3-point line. And so that's gonna, you can't get too stretched out because now they're attacking the rim with dump offs or post ups for Boozer, or just attacking the rim on a drive.
So it feels like, Scott, there's a couple of things that I noticed. He mentioned taking care of the basketball. They're usually pretty good at it. As you mentioned, they're very solid at holding on to the ball. But against Virginia Tech, they had 13 turnovers. They had 9 against UVA. I mentioned shooting. Against Virginia, they shot 16% from three. And against Virginia Tech, they shot 30% from three. And I think the last thing that they had was rebounding. Against UVA, Cal had a total of 26 rebounds. UVA had 32 defensive rebounds and eventually won that total output 45-26. That was the reason why they were blasted by 24 against UVA. The moving the ball in the turnovers are one thing, but for them is not taking care of the basketball. It's shooting, and the rebounding percentage is really catching up to them. Those are three areas that Duke has traditionally been pretty good: forcing turnovers, forcing teams to take bad shots. You mentioned how far away from the basket they are when they shoot. And also offensive rebounding. When we rebound well, we usually win games pretty easily.
It's interesting. You only mentioned the matchups against top 100 teams, and there are only a handful of those for a reason. Cal's record is very much inflated by playing some very subpar non-conference teams. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that they played a game against the Dominican Penguins. And you'd say, "Oh, Dominican, their mascot's a penguin. Where are they located from?" They're a team in California. They're a D2 representative, from California that was somehow named a penguin. I'd love to dive in deep in how they settled on the Penguins as their mascot. But that is, a little bit of a flavor of the types of teams that Cal was beating up on when they were doing all of these positive things, when they were not turning it over, when they were shooting, closer to 40% from deep. Is this team the team that's 13-4, or is this team the team that's 1-3 in the ACC? This week for them is going to go a long way into determining that.
I think the last thing I have on the metrics before we take a break is I mentioned on the offensive things that have been skewed. I think the one thing to note as well as you mentioned that on offense, they're one of the poorest teams in the ACC at how far away from the basket they take their shots. But on defense, they allow teams to get as close to the basket as possible. They're 18th. They're dead last in the conference in average 2-point distance. And so, again, this opens up a lot of opportunities for Duke to really go at them underneath because especially with some of the injuries they've had a couple of guys that have been out. Their size isn't as major as some of the other teams that we'll face in the ACC. But we will talk about that on the other side of this break. We'll get to the players, we'll get to the things to watch, and also we say goodbye to a coach who is very, very familiar to the ACC, Bill Courtney. We will give him a tribute after this.
All right, folks, new year, bigger goals, no time to cook? Factor makes it easy with fully prepared meals designed by dietitians and crafted by chefs, so you can eat well without the shopping or the cooking.
Factor meals are always fresh and never frozen meals that are ready in about 2 minutes. No prep, no stress. With over 100 rotating weekly meals, including options like high protein, calorie smart, or even a Mediterranean diet, there's something for everyone to enjoy. Plus, the new Muscle Pro collection supports strength and recovery, and they're delicious, which is the most important part.
Yes, it is, Donald. Hey, folks, head to factormeals.com/DukeBB50off. Again, use that code DukeBB50off to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free breakfast for a year. That offer is only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. Make healthy eating easier with Factor.
Walmart Business saves you time, money, and hassle, which means you can focus on what really matters, like putting the money you save back into what you do, spending more time training your team, filling orders, and finding new clients. Anything and everything, right down to, oh, that's the one, choosing the best hold music. Walmart Business. It's the Walmart you love, now for your business. Learn more at business.walmart.com.
Support for the Fans First Sports Network comes from Hyper Natural Style. Men's Journal calls it the best men's polo shirt of 2024. Hyper Natural offers polos, tees, and button-ups that deliver unmatched comfort and style. Hyper Natural is a new generation of clean bio-performance clothing that reduces impact on the planet as well as your own health. Hypernatural created the first ever shirts made from jade stone and crab shells. Supreme natural comfort and cooling performance without harmful chemicals and plastic polyester. Visit hypernaturalstyle.com and receive 20% off at checkout using promo code FFSN. That's hypernaturalstyle.com using FFSN. Thank you for your support.
All right, we are back. We continue our preview of the game coming up tomorrow night, late for everybody, even people on the West Coast, against the Cal Golden Bears. We have done the metrics, we've done the records and stuff. Let's get to the players because, Scott, as you mentioned before the break, this is a team that people may recognize some of the names, but they come from other places. This is a very transfer-heavy team.
So this is going to be the second game in a row where Duke fans are going to see a name on the opposition and go, I wonder if it's that kid, and it is. Justin Pippen is the son of Scottie Pippen. He is one of the two main engines that drives this Cal team, along with Day Ames. Justin Pippen played last year at Michigan. He was one of the first big recruits that Dusty May was able to pull in. He was a very highly thought of top 50 guy. Wasn't able to crack his way into the Michigan rotation. Actually left the team even while the NCAA tournament was going on to enter the transfer portal, which was a little bit weird, but that is the world we live in. He was known, even in his limited minutes at Michigan, as a defensive specialist. He's carried that over into Cal. He's one of the top players in the country in terms of things like steal rate and block rate. He's got decent positional size at about 6'3". So he is a very solid defensive guard who has turned it up offensively now that he is playing significant minutes at Cal. He's really good at attacking the basket. He draws fouls at a very, very high rate. He doesn't shoot it particularly well, though. Even though he's attacking the basket and drawing fouls, he only shoots 42% from two. He takes a lot of threes, but only shoots it at around a 34% clip. So this is a very high usage player, a player who, by all accounts, is good at getting to the rim and by the amount of fouls that he's drawing. He's just not converting at the rate that you would like. If I'm Duke, I'd much rather Justin Pippen have to beat us than Day Ames. Day Ames is a multi-transfer guy. He went from Kansas State to Virginia to Cal. He's gone from the middle of the country to the East Coast to the West Coast. He's going all across the country and studying abroad within the United States. He is a dead-eye shooter. He's nearly 46% from deep on the year on pretty high volume. But he's not really a traditional point guard. He's a very low turnover guy, but he's also not getting a lot of assists. This is a team that is a lot of a one-on-one creation from Day Ames and Justin Pippen. But again, Day Ames is a guy who has been increasing and improving. He's played it everywhere he's been. He's played at Kansas State. He played at Virginia. Now at Cal, he's getting the most minutes he's ever gotten. He's improved his offensive numbers step by step as he's traversed the country. So this is the guy who Duke is going to want to shut down. And Duke has a chance to shut him down because, again, despite all these lofty metrics, he's a 6-foot point guard. And Duke has, as we've talked about over and over on this show, Duke has the size to make undersized guards, really struggle.
The two guys that you mentioned, Day Ames, Justin Pippen. First of all, Day Ames last year at UVA, he actually had a pretty good game against us. 15 points, 3 assists, and a rebound on 5 of 8 shooting. And I think, as you mentioned, he's kind of the for lack of a better term, he's like an Allen Iverson type point guard, a score first type of point guard. And if you cut him down and neutralize him, it's not necessarily that the body will wither, but as you mentioned, it puts a lot of extra pressure on Justin Pippen to perform. And with his shooting from 3, that's where they kind of start to lose the plot a little bit. They'll start shooting a little bit more threes to try and catch up. And especially at home, they're going to want the momentum, and threes provide a lot of momentum. If they're going to be hitting a lot of mid-range jumpers, that's one thing. But if they're hitting threes to try and keep Duke within reach, that's going to be quite another. Justin Pippen's going to take a lot of those. I know you're about to talk about Chris Bell. Chris Bell also is going to take a metric ton of threes. So there's going to be a lot of guys in these, in that starting lineup that all can shoot threes. As I should say, they all are going to shoot threes. It's just dependent on what their clip is, and it's very across the board.
Chris Bell is the sort of third offensive option for Cal. That's a name that ACC fans, Duke fans probably recognize. They just don't recognize him at Cal. He spent 3 years at Syracuse, briefly overlapped with our own Malik Brown out there. He's a guy who does one thing and one thing only, which is shoot open threes. He's 6'7". He has good positional size. He shoots 38% from beyond the arc, and he takes a heck of a lot of threes. But that's pretty much all he does. He's not a take you off the dribble. He's not attacking the rim very often. He's not taking many twos. He's a very one-dimensional player. Same thing with their starting bigs. And they do have non-trivial size down low. John Camden, 6'8", 220, a fifth-year guy, is their nominal 4. but he is essentially a stretch four and a stretch four only. He shoots 36% from three, which is great, but a massively disproportionate amount of his shots are from three. He is not a guy, by all accounts, who has much of a post game, who's going to use his 6'8", 220 size to take you to the rim. And none of his defensive metrics jump off the page either. So in both Bell and Camden, you have guys who have good size on paper, but in practice seem to be really, shoehorned into the role of floor spacers and shooters. The last guy who's always relevant is the center in the opposition. Is Duke fans. We've got size, and we want to see whether the opposition can match up with Cam Boozer and Pat Gongba. Lee Dort is the one guy who you might recognize from watching Cal last year. He's their one returner who played minutes for them last year. He was more of a bench, backup big. Now he's their primary center this year. He's 6'10", 235. He's playing 60% of their minutes, so he's getting good run. And he's one of the best rebounders in the country by all of the advanced metrics. He's especially on the defensive end. He is going to gobble up those defensive rebounds. It is going to be very difficult for Cam Boozer to get those give me that ball, nice, easy put back type of points that we've grown to see from him. He's also a solid rim protector. He's the type of guy who's going to get a few blocks over the course of a game. But he's a very, very low usage offensive player. He does not shoot threes, and by does not shoot threes, I mean he has never attempted a three in his college career, not even a Mason or a Marshall Plumlee three as of yet. So this is a guy who is going to take the easy buckets if they come by him. Otherwise, he's going to sit there and get rebounds and fulfill that job as a traditional big.
It's funny because last year when we played Cal, I remember discussing Lee Dort, of course, because of his ties to his brother, right? Lou Dort's in the NBA and a very good player.
Another name that I should have mentioned. Is he related? Yeah, he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talked about Lee Dort, it was like, hey, coming off the bench, he's just going to be a guy that's going to try and get as many rebounds as possible, maybe get some putbacks, going to try and block some shots. And if we are able to limit what he does off the bench, then their bench is almost dead. And now that he's a starter, I mean, last year we held him to 3 points, 2 blocks, and 2 steals. He did not get a single rebound. So this time around, again, you kind of have this question of which one is he going to guard. And so I put it to you. I don't know if you're done with all the players yet, but I wanted, with the starting lineup at least, we've seen a little bit of changing from John Shire in our starting lineup the last few games. Who do you put in here to line up against, especially their bigs? I know you got Cam and you got Pat, but does Pat get to start again, or do you think Malik Brown starts again along with Caden Boozer?
If I'm Mark Madsen, I'm hoping for Malik Brown, because I think if Malik Brown starts, that allows Lee Dort to spend more time guarding Cam Boozer. I think that you want the biggest body possible against Cam Boozer. Yes, we know Cam has that X outside game. Yes, we know Cam can shoot it from three, but he is best when he is being bigger and stronger than his opposition and using that to his advantage. I think as much as possible, Cal probably wants to use Lee Dort to guard Cam Boozer, and then John Camden can just sort of cover Malik and play a little bit of help D. Again, we love Malik Brown, but we know the offense is not flowing through him. We are not attacking with him. The other thing is as we mention these bigs, it is worth noting that this is a very thin Cal team. They are one of the, they play their bench one of the lowest rates in the country, and they really only go 7 deep. They have Symmetry Carr is their main source of bench play on the perimeter. He's a 6'1" freshman who was a 3-star prospect, so not the type of guy you sort of expect to be getting major minutes in the ACC as a freshman, and that's sort of showing. He has, very low shooting numbers across the board. Their backup big is Milos Ilic. He fouls, get this, 6.5 fouls per 40 minutes, which is astronomical. So he is the type of guy who, if he's in there, he is probably going to be taking every single chance to put Cam Boozer on the line. I can't imagine he's going to play more than 10-ish minutes this game, and he's probably going to get 4 or 5 fouls in those 10 minutes to make Cam Boozer, and to a lesser extent Pat Gongba, earn everything while he's in the game. So for the second game in a row, we're playing an opponent that is a little undersized on the perimeter and is a very, very shallow bench. Those are two things that have been major, major pluses for Duke in the past. Obviously, we had some mixed results against SMU. It'll be interesting to see whether John Shire is able to get his guys to take advantage of the mismatches that presents tomorrow night in California.
It's interesting that once again we have a team that is very, I guess, they rely heavily on their starters. And again, for them, John Shire kind of mentioned this, like, hey, we have to travel out west, but they have to travel too, right? They have to travel each and every week. And, the fact that Cal and Stanford have to basically travel cross country almost every other week to get to play their games and then, come back, that we're entering that part of January where your legs start to get a little tired from all that traveling. And with a shorter bench, I wonder how Mark Madsen works around that and gets his guys ready to withstand heavy minutes, especially for us, having the 9-person, 9-deep rotation that we do have, even with Darren Harris getting a limited number of minutes. We're able to remain fresher by just having those guys on there and protecting guys when they're in foul trouble. So it's an interesting matchup. That's why I asked about the starters, because as we've changed them around, I could see John Shire going back to the starters that we've basically had most of the year. But there's always questions at the 3 spot, and also how do you line up in in the 4 spot to basically draw their biggest guy away from Cam Boozer and let Cam Boozer do their thing, or if you're going to put him on Cam, hopefully that opens up Pat to do his thing like he did the other day. I want to move to the things to watch, and I want to start with, again, I promised this at the top of the show. We have some sound from John Shire, and I asked John about what it was, what they wanted to do out west, because when you go on a road trip, it's one thing, it's a way for your team to kind of come together, walk into an arena where everyone's cheering against you, almost everyone's cheering against you, and figure out a way to win. And you learn a lot on those road trips about the togetherness of a team. But this is a different road trip because they're basically on the West Coast. They left yesterday. They're going to be on the West Coast all week. They're playing 2 games. They're not coming back between the games. And it's similar to that road stretch that we had last year. We went to play at Arizona and then had that game against Kansas and Vegas. And you kind of, again, those are unique road trips, an opportunity to get to know your team. And he talked about that, but also had a very interesting quote from our beloved Coach K that he uses to instill in his players what it is like to play for Duke at this time of the season. So here it is.
Well, the theme for me is taking the next step and maxing out who we can be. I, again, you don't take winning for granted. Every win is, a challenge, and I'm proud of what we've done. But I want us to really grow together this week. That's part of. I told our team. I remember my freshman year. I heard a story from Coach K that January is the month that you learn about who you are as a team. Not December or not February. It's January you find out. And so what better time to find out about ourselves halfway through the month of January on the road together for a week. I think it's an amazing opportunity for us to grow, learn something new, and we plan on doing that.
All right, I want to repeat that quote that he said. January is the month that you learn about who you are as a team. Coach K said that. John Shire believes it, and I believe in John Shire, so I believe it too. This is the time of year where, as I mentioned, legs start to get tired. Those nagging aches start to get a little more sore because you're playing more games. You're a little bit further in the season. You don't quite see March yet, Scott, but you're getting there. You're getting close to that turn of the month where you kind of go, okay, March Madness is starting to get on the horizon here. We've played one big game in Louisville. We have another one in a week. In a couple weeks. And then we have obviously the 2 against UNC and a lot of games in between. But this is an opportunity for this team to kind of continue to shed the bad play that they had the past couple of weeks and continue to get better as a team. That's the first thing I want to watch, but I also want you to comment on the sound with John Shire. And of course, that little quote by Coach K, which even though he's retired, he still finds a way to teach us.
The thing that stuck out to me from that audio was actually something a little bit different. Is when John said, we need to max out who we can be. And I thought
Hmm.
that was a very telling choice of words. It was almost to me a coded way of saying, hey guys, this isn't last year's team, right? This isn't Con Knippel and Cooper Flag aren't walking through that door, right? Lest we forget how astronomically of an outlier last year's team was. Both Cooper Flag or Con Knippel are fighting each other for Rookie of the Year in the NBA
Yeah.
right now. I'm not sure if it's ever been the case that two guys from the same school have gone 1-2 in Rookie of the Year voting, and it might end up that Cedric Coward, a guy who could have been a Duke Blue Devil, ends up third or
It's
fourth.
right
But
there. Yeah.
that's a completely other story. So this is a time where we learn who we are. This team is not a juggernaut. This team is not the juggernaut of last year. But this team is also 15-1. This is a team that if they max out who they are, let's make no, bones about it. If they max out who they are, they can cut down the nets in April. But they're going to do that in a little bit of a different way. They're going to have to max out who they are. They're going to have to find the rotations, find the fit that came so nicely and fluidly last year that has been a bit more of a struggle this year. And again, it's so much nicer to be able to learn those lessons and troubleshoot things and figure things out during wins rather than losses. Duke has, to be frank, been a little bit, fortunate in some cases that that's been the case. But it's notable to me that John Shire seems to recognize that. He talked that way in the post game after SMU. He obviously sort of, chose his words very carefully in response to your question yesterday in this media availability. It's about maximizing this group. And maximizing this group still means go win a national championship, but it's going to look a little bit different. And it's time for A, Duke fans to recognize that, and B, for John Shire and this team to recognize that and figure out what it's going to take to maximize who they are.
I'm glad you said that because I was going to save this for the last point of things to watch, but I'm just going to move it to the second. And it's about balancing our offense. And if you think about it, over the last few games, we've attempted more threes than twos. But as I look in the post, I see number 12 and number 21, and I'm like, get them the ball, right? And they've been getting the ball, but as you mentioned in the last game, Cam was taking more threes than twos, and we want him inside the post where he can do the most damage, especially against a team that apparently allows you to get all the way to the basket and score. So balancing that offensive attack, I think, is key. Getting the shots that are our strengths, which are the 2-pointers that are right at the rim, open threes, again, passing the ball around to find that open shot. And then if there's a lane, attack it. Get to the lane where we have great passers. We have great guys who can finish in the paint. So if you're putting them in a position where they have multiple options that they're successful at, that's when they're going to help our team and really put the pressure on Cal to, have to play catch up. I think a lot of our slow starts is it takes us a long time for us to get to that moment where we can go, oh, we can do this. I can get the ball to number 12 down low, and he's just going to go around and either put it in or get fouled and go to the line. Like, we have those opportunities where if we start that earlier, it puts the pressure on the other team. They have to spend the energy to catch up. They have to spend the energy to stay within reach. And once they're gassed, that's when we can take over.
You asked me a little bit ago who starts for Duke in the post. I think the more interesting question is who starts for Duke on the perimeter. It wouldn't shock me if we see Nick Amenia back in the starting lineup tomorrow night.
I thought
Or
about him.
if
Yeah.
not starting, at least getting closer to starters minutes, because we saw against SMU a lot of the skills that John Shire was extolling in the preseason. The fact that Nick Amenia is a connector, right? And that's one of John Shire's favorite words. And he hasn't used it very much this year. He hasn't called people, the Sion James style connector this year. I think Nick Amenia has the skill set, more than anyone else, given the makeup of this roster to do that. I think we saw that a little bit against SMU. The fact that he got 4 assists, and we'll never know, how severe his ankle sprain was, how much that's been holding him back over the last few weeks. But if John Shire diagnoses his team and says the slow starts are more offensive stagnation than defensive effort, then the solution to that may be to get Nick Semenya in the lineup earlier to provide that connective tissue, to get that ball rotation, to make sure that the right people are getting the ball in the right spots. That wouldn't surprise me if at the very least Nick Semenya sees a significantly increased role during this road trip to, again, be that connector that's seemingly been missing over the last few weeks for Duke.
Real quickly, the last couple of things I have to watch. You mentioned rebounding. I mentioned rebounding. I think it's key that we win the rebounding battle and really make it a lopsided affair. Because I think if it's a lopsided affair, that's leading to a lot of second chance points on the offensive end, and maybe even leading to a lot of fast break points and transition points for Duke if we're getting them on defense. I think if you're going up against a team that is poor with their rebounding, you have to exploit that, especially with the bigger guys that we do have. I mentioned getting the ball down low. I'm going to say it again. Cam, Pat, get them the ball inside the paint where they can do their thing. Figure out ways to get them the ball in the post where they could not just score, but also pass to open guys, guys who are crashing the lane, guys who are on the wing or in the corner for threes. I think when they have the ball in their hands and they have room to do their thing, that is when Duke can be their most dangerous. And then finally, defending the three. This is an opportunity on the road to go in there and tell a team, you thought you had momentum, but you don't. And I want this to be a team that perimeter-wise, if some of these guys, as you mentioned, start hitting their threes when they traditionally don't, that's when teams have been able to kind of, stay in the game and stay making it where it's a struggle back and forth, and we have to, again, expend energy that we shouldn't expend. On a road trip, you want to conserve as much energy as possible for that finish. And I think this team needs to learn how to start quicker, not necessarily great, but it has to start quicker. And also, when we get a lead, if we get a lead, take them out. Like, it's don't play with your food. Go and finish your meal, finish the game, finish strong, and make it where this team doesn't feel like they have the opportunity with the crowd behind them to catch up. I think those are the main things here as we enter Cal. And again, Cal's a decent team. As you mentioned, they have really good players who can do their thing, but we got to take them out of their rhythm. And they've lost the rhythm last week in Virginia. Let's hope that rhythm didn't find itself in their dorm rooms when they came back across country to play at home.
Those inflection points, as John Shire calls them, are going to be the biggest key to me. If Duke gets up 5 early, can we stretch it to 10? If Duke is up 10, going into the half, can we stretch it out to 10 to 15 rather than letting it shrink to 5? When we get a big lead, do we expand it rather than sitting on it? Those are the things that are going to lead to the comfortable wins that we haven't had in a little bit, and they've had Duke fans a little bit, clutching their pearls. And that's something that we were a little spoiled last year by. Last year's team had a hell of a killer instinct. They knew how to put teams away, and we won a lot of games by 20 and 30 and 40 points. That is the next step for this team. Go out and say, we are better than this team, and we aren't going to let them hang around, and we aren't going to let the home crowd, we aren't going to let a fluky 3 burn us, because we're going to be up 10, we're going to be up 15, we're going to be up 20, and that's not going to matter as much. That is what this team needs to do to take that next step and to really cement itself amongst the top tier of college basketball.
As John Shire said in the locker room, with that clip of this locker room rant against Louisville, like, play with the intensity, play with a sense of urgency. Just because it's Cal and not, UNC that you're lining up against doesn't mean that the urgency and intensity shouldn't be present. Let's make it present. Again, very, very late on Wednesday night, 11 p.m. Eastern time on ACC Network. So you can watch that there. Before we get out of here, though, I did want to issue kind of a melancholy happy trails, as they would say on PTI, to Temple assistant coach Bill Courtney, who passed away today. He was 55 years old. He coached in the college ranks for over 30 years. He was the head coach for Cornell from 2010 to 2016, and he had assistant stints with so many different places: American, Bowling Green, George Mason, Providence, UVA, Virginia Tech, and DePaul. The past 6 seasons before this year, he was an associate head coach at Miami, and more recently served as the interim head coach when Jim Larrañaga retired this past year, and left when Jay Lucas was hired. He left Miami, moving to Temple, where he was an assistant coach under Adam Fisher until his passing today. I just want to issue, my condolences to him, his family. He was a very nice guy, always gracious. With last year when he was thrust into a very difficult situation, handling the press calls with grace, with care, with detail, with a little bit of humor. He knew that he was in a kind of sticky situation with regards to being thrust into this role prematurely, and was able to handle it with all the gravitas that he possibly could. He will be missed. Obviously, he coached at Miami, which is my other alma mater. So, I will say, for him, hopefully he's looking down, and hopefully he's able to help move the football and the basketball for Miami this season, of course, except when they are playing Duke.
I can't imagine many more difficult jobs than being an interim head coach at a major college basketball or football program. The fact that Bill Courtney was able to do that, like you said, with such grace and such aplomb, is just such a testament to him. And it's always sad when we lose someone too early.
May his memory be a blessing, as they say. And we will conclude this DBR Bites with that. So again, Scott and I will be back at some point, not immediately after the game, but at some point to recap everything that happens with the Cal game, and also get you ready for this weekend's matchup where we will stay on the West Coast to play Stanford. But until then, he's Scott, I'm Donald. It's now time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.